So we have this process of school transformation, and oftentimes what we can find in our leadership efforts is that we can get frustrated because the folks we work with don't necessarily want to embrace the changes that we bring forward. And so it's important for us to kind of view adult learning from a different perspective. So I asked this question here. If you were told that you must change your lifestyle or face tremendous consequences within a few months or years, would you do it? And several years ago, there was Dr. Edward Miller, who was a dean of and CEO of Johns Hopkins University, the hospital there. And my apologies, I don't know if you can still hear my dogs, but I'm so sorry. I'm going to shut the door. One moment here. One moment. Out of 10, Dr. Edward Miller said that 90% of people after 2 years of bypass surgery have not changed their lifestyles. And he said this has been studied over and over again, even though participants in, the surgery know that they have a bad disease. They know they should change their lifestyle for the better. For whatever reason, they can't. Now, here's why this is important for us as leaders. Jane Heiss once said this, right? Change is difficult. And as leaders, we must recognize that. We have to recognize that our teachers are more difficult teachers, those that we tend to struggle with a bit more, or that seemed closed off to new suggestions and things like that. Oftentimes, deep down inside, they do want to change. But for whatever reason, it can be a difficult thing because learning can be a struggle at the adult level if it's not approached in the right way. So what I want to do right now is I want to ask you a couple of questions and connect some new learning with these facts. I'd like you to read through each of these statements, and I'd like you to see if you can identify which is the most important to you as a learner. So you might fall into one of these 4 prominent learning style categories. 1, are you a person who needs research, right? I need to see the research. I need to see that this is a proven approach first before I believe in it. 2, maybe you're a person who doesn't necessarily need to see the research, but you need to understand the why. You need to connect new learning with a purpose. Why does this matter right now? Why should I put my energy into learning this new thing? 3, maybe you're a person who needs to connect and collaborate and process verbally with other people. So you need to be able to talk it out and work through it in a verbal way. You're a verbal processor in order for you to make sense of new information and then be able to turn around and apply it. Or 4, maybe you're the person who just needs to know what to do. You want to be able to see it in action. It needs to be spelled out. It needs to be very practical and applicable, and you need to see those detailed plans. That might be you. Basically, you fall into one of these 4 prominent learning styles, right? So each adult learner that we work with, whether it be the teachers in our buildings, our programs, or even the adults that are sitting in their classrooms, have one of these 4 prominent learning styles. Now, not to say that we don't need others, and sometimes we even find that once I'm given research, then I need to move on into connecting it to my purpose, or I need to move on and process and talk it out. Sometimes we find that more than one of these approaches is necessary for us to actually be able to make the learning connect and to make the then subsequent changes. So let's work through each of these prominent learning styles and talk about its implications on our work through observation and feedback, right? So let's talk about those that are research first, because I guarantee you have teachers in your building who fall into this learning style. This is what they need, right? Things that they might say, that they might come to you and ask, or maybe might share with their colleagues, are some of these questions that you see on the screen. They're the ones who tend to question things a little bit more, and that questioning isn't necessarily them challenging what we're doing, being naysayers. Part of their questioning in this manner can be them actually processing and trying to reach out for the right information to help them make sense of this new learning that we are asking them to do, or the change that we're asking them to make in their classrooms. So when we leave feedback, as we observe in a classroom and we leave feedback, oftentimes they might come back to us and ask these things, or in a meeting, stand up and ask some of these things. And when we hear these types of statements, it can be very easy for us to immediately think, oh goodness, they're resistant, they're opposed to this change, they're going to give me grief. When on the other hand, they're simply, this is part of that listening filter, right? They're simply looking for some more information. So it's essential that we, as you see now on the screen, provide research. We talk about success criteria. We look at case studies. And I've actually given you a little website here. It's All Things PLC. And you can type in, go to this website and type in topics, and it will pull up research articles for you that can help you with identifying and accessing sources of research to support some of the work that you're doing. It's a great resource. But it's important that we understand when we hear this particular type of conversation, it's important that we understand they're essentially speaking their needs. They're needing these things in order for them to process and learn. All right, let's move on to the second one, or the next one. This is the purpose-driven folks, right? So here's some statements or questions that these people may ask. And again, it can be very easy for us as leaders to instantly take these questions or these comments, no one ever asked me for my input. It's very easy for us to read into that and think, oh, they're being resistant, they're opposed to everything. When really, if we have the right filter over our ears and we're listening very carefully, when we hear statements like this or questions like these, really at the root of it, they're asking to be connected with a purpose. They don't see the larger vision, the bigger picture, the why. So it's important that in this work that we follow these action steps. When we're rolling out new things, when we're offering feedback, it's important that we connect this to the why, that we talk about, and by the way, this is not a typo. Pete and I refer to mission and vision as mission. We kind of put those two things together. And so it's important that we connect everyone to the mission and the mission statement. But in addition to the common mission, we also want to connect everybody to their personal mission, right? Why are you doing what you're doing? What's the big picture for your work? How do you see yourself connected to the larger goal? So the third prominent learning style are those folks that are collaborative processors. So these are some statements that we might hear in terms of feedback from teachers to us, right? As we're rolling out new things or as we're engaging in some new learning. These are statements that we need to hear them. And basically, again, if we listen carefully, they're asking to collaborate and process with someone else. That's how they form their new learning and make the connections they need to make. That's how they work through that new learning in their minds. So some action steps that we need to provide is to basically talk about it, offer up opportunities for dialogue. Might even be something as simple as, okay, after school today or tomorrow from this time to this time, anyone who wants to meet and discuss how to engage your students in a deeper way, let's all meet and let's have a discussion and let's talk about it. We might invite questions and then ask other teachers to answer the questions of their colleagues. We basically facilitate opportunities for everyone to collaborate in a verbal manner and process together. Our fourth prominent learning style are those that are in the make it, take it category, right? So these might be some things that we hear from teachers that need to have something practical, right? Just tell me what you want me to do, right? Let me do it before you ask me to think about it. What exactly do you want, right? These are things and statements that we might hear. And this then offers us the right radar to be able to go, okay, this person, here's what they need from me as a leader. They need me to help facilitate, what this actually looks like. So maybe I need to go to another teacher and ask them to go model a lesson in a classroom. Maybe I need to pull in a mentor teacher or a coach to come into that classroom. Maybe I need to express and communicate my expectations in a bigger way. So essentially, what I've just briefly shared with you are 4 prominent learning styles that all come together. Because at the end of the day, as leaders, when we recognize these differences, When we begin to recognize and begin to listen in a different way, we begin to realize that, maybe the teachers who are resistant or reluctant, or maybe even they seem defiant toward us as leaders or toward new approaches, maybe perhaps we are seeing what's on the surface and we're not looking what's underneath the surface at where this is stemming from. And maybe really they're asking something from our leadership that we need to provide. So at the end of the day, when we recognize these 4 leadership styles, what we do is then we are essentially empowering teachers to take charge of their own professional growth. We want them to speak to these things. We want them to be actually able to identify what their own prominent learning style is, so that instead of perhaps going, why are we doing this anyway? They can then perhaps reframe their question and say, I'm unsure about the why. I'm a purpose-driven type of person, type of learner, and I need to be connected to my why in order to be able to make sense of this thing that you're asking me to do. So we're providing opportunities to think about changes as we do them, and we're empowering teachers as learners through this process. So here's what I would like you to do right now. You can either open up your mic and talk, or you can go to the chat section. I'd like to hear from you. Let's start with question number 1. As you listen to these 4 learning styles, which did you identify most as your dominant learning style? I'd love to hear from you. So jump on the chat line and let's hear. What did you have to say with this? What connected with you? How do you learn yourself? Okay. Debbie, purpose-driven. Good.
I like that mission thing.
Right? The mission and vision makes it a little easier, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I love it. Ellen, yes, the purpose again. Then collaborate and talk it out, right? Isn't it interesting how we need to kind of fall in order of specific things? Okay, Danielle, yours was number 3, which is the collaborative processor. All right. Suzanne, the why. While the rest of you are chiming in and talking, or going to fill in the chat lines here, this is a very good activity to do with your staff, because what it does is again, our purpose as leaders, remember, is to empower everyone to understand themselves as learners. Because when I understand myself as a learner, and then I begin to understand the people I work with as learners, then I actually become a better teacher, because now I'm understanding and seeing my own students through these 4 lenses as well. Okay, we've got Bernice, purpose, collaborate, backed up by research. All right, I love that you're putting it in that order. Purpose-driven. Isn't it interesting to see how many fall in that purpose-driven category? I do this activity often with groups of folks, and I always ask everyone to go to one corner of a room, and we stand and we look to see, just statistically speaking, how it all frames and lays out. And it's always interesting to see those that are in the 4 categories, and I find that the 2 prominent ones are what we see even here. We tend to have the largest group in purpose-driven, and we have the largest group in the collaborate, to talk it out. There's always 1 or 2 in the make it take it, and 1 or 2 in the research, but I tend to find that most fall in the need to understand purpose, and then the need to collaborate and process it verbally, which is interesting, isn't it? Because if we are walking through classrooms, we're observing what we see in the room, and we're offering up feedback, and we are offering up that feedback, and we're asking teachers to think more deeply about what they do. What's interesting is that if we can lead through all those 4 learning styles, what are we asking teachers to do? We're asking them to think more deeply. When we provide an opportunity, when we give research, number 1, for those that need research, when we connect it to the why, and we ask teachers to make connections right? Between what we're asking them to do and our mission or our vision. When we provide opportunities for teachers to talk it out, and when we ask teachers to make it, take it, and then come in and talk about it, essentially we're deepening how teachers think about their practice. So here's what I'd like to ask now. Number 2, which of these is your dominant leading style? So here's what I'd like you to really deeply reflect on right now. I'd like you to reflect and think about, as a leader, when you offer feedback to teachers and ask them to try something new, or when you roll something out, maybe it's just simply a new initiative. You know, I want us all to use this form, or I want us to try this. Out of those 4 learning styles, which is your dominant leading style? Which do you tend to default to, if any? Or do you simply just say, here's what we're going to do, kind of make it, take it, everybody out there, let's do it? So think about when you've brought an initiative to the table, or if you've asked a teacher to try something new, you use. Justine, I love it. I learned by 1 and 2, but lead by 3. And that's supposed to be 3 and 4 or 3 and 3? Emphasizing 3. Purpose driven. Oh, okay, you got it. Number 4. Lead by 3 and 4. That's interesting, Justine. More toward collaborative with purpose. All right. Lead by 3 as well. Excellent. Lead collaboratively. Very nice. Okay, so now what I'd like you to do is I'd ask you to do this for just a minute. I remember that teacher I asked you, I said, think at the very beginning, somebody that you're working with, that maybe you're struggling with, you're working with particularly, you have that teacher in the forefront of your mind. As you've listened to these 4 learning styles, and you're thinking of your engagement with this teacher, where would they fall based upon what you've heard them say to you, seen them do, listen to their thinking? What would you identify as their dominant style currently right now? Because we know it can shift, but currently, what would you identify as their learning style? Okay, Justine, they need to make it, take it, and then they need to talk about it. Debbie, make it, take it. Interesting.
Interesting,
all right.
Maybe not such a good way.
Right. So talk to me about ahas that you're having here as we've kind of walked through thinking of yourself in terms of your learning style, your leading style, and this teacher that you're working with. What are some implications?
My teacher is very, very resistant to change. I thought it was interesting when you showed the graphic about, only 1 out of 10, would make the changes. I had a father who actually was that 1 out of 10, but I think you're probably right. It's just too much for some people.
It can be, yes. 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 Change can be very difficult, and one of the reasons behind that, and I'd like to, roll kind of into our more difficult folks here in a minute, because we're seeing a common pattern. For many of our more difficult folks, they want the make it, take it. Just show me what you want me to do, and I will go through the motions and I'll get it done. And so often we tend to lead with let's talk about it, let's try to process it, let's work through it. We're throwing all this other stuff at them. And at the end of the day, just show me what you want me to do. And it's important, I'll kind of move on from here, and then I want to come back. Would you tell me, I didn't catch who was just speaking just a minute ago. I missed the voice. Who was just speaking?
I spoke a minute ago. I'm not sure if it was me or not. I did speak before Debbie.
It was you, Debbie. Thank you. Debbie, I want to come back to your teacher in just a moment. But what I want to do is let's talk about the implications to understanding learning styles, right? I was recently in a building And the principal, this was at a high school level, and the principal said, you've got to come watch what we're doing. So went in, and it was at the beginning of a staff meeting. And what he did was he had choice set up, so stations set up in the staff meeting. So for the first 20 minutes of the staff meeting, he had a research center with some research articles, and all of these were centered around a common initiative that the teachers were all focused upon. So he had a table set up with research, he had a table set up with the school mission statement, and then he had one of his leaders, his site leadership, sitting at that table, and they had an activity where they were going to make some connections between the why and the initiative and answer questions. And then he had a table with some discussion questions where participants could just sit and guide or have a discussion around these particular questions, and had opportunity to just simply talk about things, this initiative. And then of course the fourth one, he had another one of his, I think it was vice principals, sitting at the table, and they walked through and he had a video of another teacher in the building that they had taken modeling a lesson. And those that needed to go see it in action went over to that table. And so as teachers walked in the door, they had a choice. They had a smorgasbord in front of them, and they could decide based upon their current needs around that initiative of what was going to lead their own learning, what they felt that they were missing and what they needed. They could then go to those tables. It was a powerful thing, and let me tell you why. One, we know that adult learners need choice in their learning. This comes from Malcolm Knowles' adult learning theory. Adult learners need choice, because when I have a choice in learning and I'm able to make the connections between myself as a learner and what I need, what I'm being asked to do, then I have choice in this, and this automatically gives me a bit of ownership. I no longer can pass off the buck onto somebody else and be like, well, they didn't do what I needed them to do, or I don't know, it's all in their hands. Sometimes our most difficult teachers, the reason they land in that number 4 category is because they don't want ownership. They want to go through the motions, and if things go wrong, they want to be able to point at us or the program or the students or whatever else it is. They want to be able to point to something else and say, that's why it's not working. So part of our roles as leaders is that we have to provide the right learning opportunities, and subtly, not in a big way, but very subtly begin to shift ownership of their own learning back on their shoulders, because they want to take it off of their shoulders. They don't want any part of it. That's why they say, just tell me what you want me to do, because they want us to be in charge of that learning, because they don't want to have to put into it. So when we offer up choice, such as this principal did, then automatically now I have to take action. I have to make a choice. I have to decide which one of these stations I'm going to go to. So that was the first powerful thing that ended up happening in a situation like that, when the principal recognized the 4 learning styles. The second thing that I watched firsthand occur was this. You had the folks that came in, kind of rolled their eyes and said, fine, I'll just go over to this table. Sure. And they sat down. Well, subtly, we know they had that choice. They sat down at the table. But then what ends up happening is when you provide choice and you let teachers engage themselves in these activities and lead the activities themselves, then all of a sudden I'm now sitting at a table, maybe not participating, but I'm sitting at a table with other peers who are then learning together in the same way that I've just chosen. And whether they're engaged in a discussion or they're reading research articles and talking about it and throwing some questions out, whatever it is, now I'm learning from my peers. And sometimes for some of our more difficult folks, that's what it takes, because all of a sudden I begin to realize, oh, wow, there's energy in this group. They're all working, and I'm kind of the odd man out. I no longer can isolate myself in my classroom. I'm sitting here part of a group, and I'm watching everybody build momentum and learning, and I'm watching them take charge of their own learning. Now, it may not happen overnight, but if this continues to happen and I continue to sit in part of these groups, for some of our more, what we would qualify or quantify as a resistant teacher, for some of our more resistant teachers, they're going to eventually start learning or listening in a quiet way. So we offer choice because adult learners need choice. Number 2, we provide opportunities for learning to be a social experience. You and I both know that our more difficult teachers oftentimes don't want to be social with their peers. And so this provides the right setting where we're facilitating socialization, and learning is a social experience, whether the person is choosing to engage or not. The final thing that I watched this principal do that I think was absolutely essential was at the end of that 20 minutes when he pulled everybody back together and shifted gears into, going over agenda items and things like that, was that he asked everyone to fill out an exit ticket. And that exit ticket was simply, what do you need next in order to develop your learning around this initiative? What more do you need from me? And that question right there then again continues to shift that ownership of learning on the teachers. What more do you need from me? How else can I support you? And if I don't want that support and there's nothing else you need from me, simply asking me that question is a reminder that I am in charge of my own learning. And even if I choose to go, nothing, no, I'm fine, don't need anything more, I'm good, it still subliminally sends a message that I am expecting you to take charge of your learning. I'm not going to do it for you. So this is important for us as leaders to be able to recognize this, particularly with our more difficult folks. We can come in and observe and provide feedback, and that's one way that we can help support them and guide them, and that's essential. But at the end of the day, what we also need to do is facilitate opportunities for teachers to then reach out and work with others. We need to provide opportunities for them to engage and learn in all 4 of these learning styles. So I've talked enough right now. We've been sitting on this slide. What I'd like to do is hear from you. What's a thought? What's an aha? A question I've surfaced? Where is your thinking right now? And I'd love to hear from everybody. So if you could just give me a short little chat. I'm going to sit here quietly and just read through what you have to say. But I want to hear from you, and I also want you to hear from one another. What's an aha you've been having? What perhaps is a question that I've surfaced? What connections are you making from what I'm saying with perhaps this teacher that's in the forefront of your mind or the work that you are currently doing? Let me hear from you. And I hear typing, so that's a good sign. Love it. Okay, Bernice. We must meet them where they are in order to assist them. Absolutely. And I love your words at the end, if possible. Yes. Because at the end of the day, remember that cartoon at the beginning? We can lead a horse to water, but we can't make them drink it. And we're not about spending all of our time and energy forcing, water bowls up to the horse's nose. We're not trying that at all. What we simply want to do is make sure that we are refining our leadership so that we provide opportunity for learning, and we are constantly setting up this culture in our programs that you are in charge of your own professional growth. And it's about thinking more deeply about what we do. And I'm going to constantly be providing and facilitating opportunities for you to, 1, think about what you do, and for you to, 2, take charge of your own professional growth. That's a powerful thing because, you and I both know, and I'm sure I challenge you to try to think of this in your own personal life. Think of a time when someone was forcing change upon you and you had no voice or choice in the matter. Think about that, how it made you feel. The minute we have voice and choice in our own learning, we then want to engage. We then take some ownership. All of a sudden, that begins to intrinsically move me. It taps into something deep inside me. And so for so many teachers who we would say, oh, they're resistant, they don't want any part of this, for so many of them, they don't feel a part of it. We haven't tapped into their voice and their choice in anything. Okay, I'm going to read through here. Beth, love the shifting of ownership. Yes. Reaching out to different learners with teachers, yes, that's huge, because when we learn this, we then transfer it to our own students. Debbie, correct about the teacher who resists change, doesn't want to take ownership. That's right. Absolutely. And for those that really are standing strong, they don't want any ownership. It's absolutely essential that we then approach things with this whole mindset. Ellen, teacher who has poor follow through. Yes, okay. So for those sometimes who are struggling, we have to remember, is simply share this with her, right? Share the styles with her and ask, say, what can I do to help support your follow through in your classroom? What types of things do you need? Joyce, teachers always learning, wanting to go to trainings, but still is in the make it, take it mentality. Ooh, very interesting. So this would be, Joyce, a very interesting question to even ask this teacher, right? You might even have that conversation. You are learning, and I love how you're going to trainings and learning new things, and one of the things I watch you is your prominent learning style is the make it, take it. And so what I want to do is I'd love to hear more about, one, what that is teaching you and how you're taking it, moving it from the make it, take it into thinking more deeply. Because at the end of the day, we tend to think that make it, take it might be the bad prominent learning style, when it isn't necessarily. Just like we encounter adults who sometimes pepper us with questions that can sometimes feel like, oh, they're just challenging, they don't want to learn this, they're simply, throwing back a lot of questions. But yet those questions are helping them process their learning. In this case, Joyce, your teacher, it's evident if she defaults constantly to the make it, take it, that might mean that that's how she learns. Give me something, I'm going to go back and I'm going to do it. What I would then do as you're following up in your feedback with her, as you observe and provide feedback, is you're going to now drill your feedback to this point of, okay, I noticed you did this. What was your thinking as you did it? What did you learn from today? And essentially what you're doing is you're drawing from the action stage teacher. If you think about it, the action stage teacher is all about, tell me what to do, make it, take it. I want to do it. I want to learn new things. I want to do it. Just show me what to do. And sometimes what we do is when she's in that stage, we want to provide her with questions that push her beyond her thinking outside of that make it, take it piece. Bernice, I love your reflection. We can absolutely, all of us, say that we're in that category. Right? Give me the make it, take it. I'm not going to choose to think anything beyond that. I don't want to move beyond that. These are great feedback prompts. Danielle, you shared through another thread, you said this, teachers seem to want make it, take it, but it can be an indication of a lack of ownership. And using choice in our own PD to draw on the energy and examples of larger teach groups will bring out choice of teachers who appear more passive. And Danielle, that is huge. I love how you said they appear more passive, because oftentimes with the teachers that we're working with, they can appear a certain way, and we can very easily categorize them into, oh, they're resistant, or oh, they don't want to take charge of their own learning. Oftentimes, if we look back at, okay, what type of a learning environment am I as a director setting up for the teachers that I'm directing? And that's a big piece. Okay, so what I want to do is I want you to think about this, and we're not going to spend too much time on this because what I want to do is connect all of this back to that scenario that you brought to the table. So what I'm going to ask you to do is this. I want you to think about this teacher that's in front of you. Well, actually, I'm going to back up. Take a moment and just kind of jot some of these questions down to keep in the forefront of your mind. As you move forward, particularly in planning for this upcoming year, there's going to be initiatives that you're going to be leading, perhaps things you want to build commitment around with all your teachers. So I want you to ask yourself this question as you roll things out. How do I address all 4 learning styles? How do I give teachers voice and choice in their own learning? And then how do I keep these 4 pieces alive throughout implementation? Not just a once and done thing, but how do we keep these 4 things alive? And more importantly, as I'm engaging in observation and feedback, how might you bring these 4 learning styles to the table through your observation and feedback. How might you offer up opportunities for each of these 4 learning styles when you do leave feedback? So what I want to do right now is I want you to think about this notion of us creating a culture of reflective practice in our buildings, in our programs. At the end of the day, this is our mission and vision. Our goal is to connect teachers with one another, to draw them out of their classrooms, and to lead them as learners, not just as teachers, but to lead them as learners. And the way that we do this is by very careful construction of learning opportunities. It's when we leave our observation and feedback, when we leave that feedback piece, we want to make sure that we throw in some research. If we know that we're working with someone who needs research to support what they're doing or the changes that we're asking them to make, we might encourage them to go talk to the teacher next door. We might make sure that we're connecting our feedback to the greater why we're doing it, to the purpose. We're reminding the teacher of the purpose behind everything. Or maybe if we recognize they need that make it take it, which in this case we have teachers that do, when they need that make it take it, what we do then is we provide opportunities for that, but then we also make sure that we direct our feedback to the thinking behind the make it take it. What did this make it take it activity teach you? How did this shift your thinking as a teacher? When you tried this, what are the outcomes? Did the expectations meet what you, or did you meet your expectations? We drive our feedback prompts right at the thinking that follows the make it take it, because essentially what we're doing is shifting that ownership. Okay, so we have about 35 minutes left, and what I want to do is really now connect this new learning with the scenarios that you brought to the table. So I want to ask you right now, and thinking of, I know Debbie, you shared you had the teacher that just really has simply no desire to take ownership of what they do. And it sounded like a number of others of you have scenarios that are similar. So let's start with that type of scenario and let's talk through that for just a minute. When we have teachers that share no desire, what are some things that we can do as leaders to A, help the teacher view themselves as a learner, and B, to support their learning through each of these 4 on-ramps? Go ahead and talk to me as you're processing and thinking. What connections are you making now? What ahas are you having? All right, Suzanne, helping that teacher develop a PD plan with accountability. Absolutely, very good. It's essential that we set up a plan. And if you notice, both Suzanne's idea and Debbie's idea, right, asking how I can support you in the classroom, all of that keeps the center of ownership on the teacher. We're not taking that away from our teachers. We're asking the teachers to maintain control and maintain that choice and that voice. So when we ask them, how can I best support you? What do you need from me to be successful? Now, here's an important piece, and I'll share this tidbit of knowledge. When we are engaging in these conversations with teachers in this way, it's absolutely important that we continue to make sure our feedback is very leading and not open-ended. If you remember, and I think we've discussed this in the past, I could be wrong, but I think we did. There are 4 types of feedback that we can offer teachers, and they connect directly to that continuum of self-reflection, right? So I'm going to copy these things down in the notes, and I'm going to connect this. So when we work with someone who is unaware, right? When this is a person we're working with, and we are asking them to make a change in their classroom, we're recognizing that they're simply going through the motions. And when we ask them questions, they really are not connected to the reality of classroom. They don't know what they don't know. It's absolutely essential that then our feedback is very directive in nature, that we don't ask open-ended questions. How did it go today? It's important that we provide directive statements, right? And those directive statements are try this, do this, here's why it works, do it when this occurs. We provide feedback that's very directive. When we're working with teachers that are in the conscious stage, we want to ask very leading type questions, right? So the leading questions are close-ended, kind of like when we're in that courtroom and you hear the, objection, leading the witness. We want to provide leading questions. We want to lead the witness here. So when we think about teachers that want the make it, take it, they can fall in the unaware category of just show me what to do. I don't know what to do, so show me what to do. And we can be very directive. Try this, 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 A, B, C. But it's important that then we fall in line immediately then with some leading feedback, right? As you've done this, talk about the successes. What did you notice? Did this work? Did this not work? Right? When we then, like Suzanne and Debbie mentioned earlier, sit down with a teacher, and we talk about how we can support them in the classroom, and we really push for them to take the ownership of things. We want to ask leading questions. We want to make sure that we are coming in going, talk to me about how we're going to get you to where we need to be, right? And then when they come back with, well, I don't see in the big picture, then we can come in with the why. Or when they come back with, I don't understand why we have to, if this even really works, then we can recognize, oh, I need to provide some research to support their understanding. We can then listen with those different filters. Now, I mentioned earlier we had an action stage teacher, perhaps too, because oftentimes teachers that need make it, take it can also fall in that action stage category. They just want to do. They're open to new learning and they're excited to try new things. So it's essential that then we provide open-ended feedback. You can see in the chat line here. It's essential that we then provide open-ended feedback for a teacher who might be operating in that action stage of just tell me what to do and I'll do it. I want to learn new things. I want to try new things. We ask open-ended. So talk to me about how I see that you've tried XYZ. How might you modify that tomorrow to meet the needs of the learners that didn't learn it with XYZ? So we offer that open-ended type questioning to really push them out of simply just adhering to what the make it, take it tells you. And then we have our final stage, which is our refinement stage. And in this case, we ask more challenging and pose more challenging prompts. And for this teacher, this is somebody who we really want them to think outside of their classroom. We really want them to look at building relationships with their peers. We want to challenge them to really begin to identify how they think about what they do and then articulate that with the people around them. So my point in sharing what I just shared is this, that each of these 4 stages on our continuum of self-reflection, these 4 stages don't necessarily connect with one specific learning style. We can have a teacher in any of these 4 stages on our continuum, and they can have a prominent learning style of make it, take it. They could be in the unaware stage and need make it, take it. They could be in the conscious stage and be make it, take it. The action, the refinement. Just because they're in the make it, take it stage does not necessarily mean that they are a beginning teacher, that they are not necessarily thinking about what they're doing. Our feedback prompts will drive them to think more deeply through make it, take it learning, if that's indeed where they are. Okay. I want to hear your thinking about this, and what I'd like you to do now is this. I'd like you to give me, just so we can connect faces and whatever names, I'd like you to give me just the first initial of the teacher that you have in forefront of you. So if it's her name is Trisha, put a T, and then put a dash, and then I'd like you to go ahead and identify this teacher. Where are they on our continuum of self-reflection, and what is their prominent learning style? You already kind of mentioned that before, but I want you to make very explicit connections between the teacher name, where they are on the continuum, and their prominent learning style. I'd like you to take a moment and think through that. And if you are unsure, feel free to pose a question. throw a question up there for me to be able to help you unpack that, teacher. If you need more understanding around the 4 stages that I just laid out on the chat line, let me know in that regard as well. But I'd like to hear from you. Think about your teacher, and I want to give you a chance to explicitly connect right now. Where are they on the continuum of self-reflection? And what is their prominent learning style? Let's connect all those things. Okay, Justine, you've got a conscious action stage teacher who needs to collaborate with their peers in order to learn. Okay, great. Joyce, unaware stage teacher. What's their prominent learning style, Joyce? Where would you identify? Debbie, unaware, make it, take it. Okay. Beth, unaware, make it, take it. All right, so Joyce, you had unaware and the make it, take it. Conscious, make it, take it. Good. All right. Oh, this worked out nicely. Everyone has the unaware, make it, take it. Okay, so let's now talk through this next step of connecting. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back on our slides here to the make it, take it. Oops, here we go, since this seems to be a very common thing. So let's now connect our unaware stage teachers with this whole notion that they learn best through make it, take it. And let's lay out a simple plan so that when you walk away here shortly, that you can go back with this teacher and follow through in terms of observation and feedback practices, follow through with something with them. So here we go. We know that these folks need to know, right? They don't have the skills. They need to know what to do. And in this case, when we connect them with being in the unaware stage, they don't know what they don't know. So what we want to make sure we do is some very specific things, okay? And let's move to the action steps. And this comes back to even being in the unaware stage. These action steps can kind of align. What we want to do is we want to make sure and think through, or we are very clear on our expectations. So what I'd like you to do right now is think about the teacher you just shared, and I'd like you to jot down quickly, what are your expectations? What is the goal for this teacher? Where do you want them to be? What, and I'm not talking grandiose, you know, let's list the 50 things. I'm talking about one thing. What would be the one thing? And if you remember one of the last webinars that we had, I shared, sometimes that can be a difficult thing when somebody is unaware. We can walk in their classrooms and see 50 things that we want to change. And one of the suggestions I made was you want to identify a quick win, something small, a quick win that can get that ball rolling, something that's going to be a quick win in the classroom. So I want you to think right now about this teacher. Think about what you see when you walk in their rooms, and I'd like you to just jot down now, what is your expectation or your goal for this teacher in terms of their practices in their classroom? What's something that, maybe it's a goal you've already set with them, maybe it's a goal that you have in your minds. What would that goal be for this teacher? And if you can't think of anything, you're unsure of what to pick from, pick a quick win. Something that's going to be quick, easy, and provide some success immediately for the teacher to be able to explicitly see. Okay, Justine, increase student talk time and communicate activities. Decrease teacher talk time. Great goal, Justine. I want to hear from some others. Okay, Beth, to differentiate. Okay. Suzanne, implementing lessons that involve activities other than reading a passage and answering questions. Okay, Debbie, all right, 3 to 5 students to practice speaking. Wonderful. Are there any more out there? Joyce, getting students doing meaningful activities. All right, very good. First of all, just some simple feedback for you. These are great goals. They're very specific. And this is something that a teacher that is particularly unaware really needs to have. If you notice that, communicate your expectations. I could even have added on to that piece to say, make your expectations very, very explicit. What does it actually look like and sound like? Oftentimes we can say something like, okay, we want you to, you know, it might even, I'll share this. I was in Texas a couple weeks ago, and I was working with a bunch of school administrators, not unlike yourselves. And there was a principal that shared that she's working with a teacher right now who talks and gives instruction, kind of like Justine was sharing, but gives instruction and talks for 20 minutes. And rather than, you know, shortening what they have to say to 5, they really spend 20 minutes giving directions to activities when it could be shortened. And so as we worked through an activity similar to what I'm doing right now with you, and really breaking down our thinking, she came up with the strategy of, you know, I really want to be explicit. And rather than say, you know, shorten how long you talk, you spend 20 minutes talking, let's be super specific. And let's make sure that when you express your expectations to this teacher, it sounds something like this. I noticed that you're talking for 20 minutes when you give directions. Tomorrow, I want you to have a timer in front of you, and I want you to set it for 5. I would like you to actually, before you give instructions, write them out on it, scribble them out on a piece of paper, and scribble your instructions, your directions for the activity out. And I want you to read from the paper and time yourself and see how long that took you. And then I'd like to hear, you know, talk to me back, and let's move on. The more specific we can be about our expectations with teachers who are in the unaware stage, the safer it then becomes for them to try something new. They're asking for make it, take it. So we're going to give them very clear make it, take it steps. That's what they want. So we need to be even more explicit than we even think we need to be when we're communicating, here's our expectations. So I want you just to think for just a moment, maybe scribble down a few notes in front of you. How might you take each of these goals and make them even more explicit and specific in terms of what it looks like and sounds like? You don't have to share on chat unless you'd like to, give an example, but just take a minute and think about this and jot down some notes for yourself. How might you take these goals and make them even more explicit in terms of tomorrow's lesson? Let's not even think past tomorrow. I hear typing, so I'm giving some think time. At the end of the day, a teacher, and not even a teacher, an adult who falls in the make it, take it category as learners, they need to be able to visualize it very clearly in their minds. And for some, that is difficult, particularly when they're unaware, when they don't know what they don't know. It would be akin to me bringing you, you know, I'm trying to think here, something that you've never done before, right? Let's take flying a plane. And I seat you in the plane, and I give you some feedback of what I want you to do, but it's very generic. And I'm not very clear on what I expect from you. That can then bring about a lot of frustration for you. And sometimes you're at a certain point of frustration when you're really unclear in terms of the visual of what you expect or what I expect from you. There's going to be a shutdown of just fine, just tell me what to do. I'll do it. And there's that shutdown. And you don't feel like you bring any voice or choice to that new learning. So that's important that we are very explicit. Joyce, you said, I've asked the teacher to start class on time with an activity to interest those who are there and not wait to start when everyone arrives. I see that I need to give more specific ideas than general do conversation time. No, but Joyce, that's a great example. And that's great because you're very explicit there, asking to start on time. So when look at the clock, when it's 9:02, get the activity going immediately for those who are there. You know, that is perfect. That's great feedback. What we want to do is bring more specificity into other things. So make sure you keep that in the back of your mind. We want to be as explicit and as visual as possible in communicating our expectations. Now, the second thing we also now want to do is we want to follow up that very explicit expectations with now some notice this, right? So when you're doing this, I want you to notice this. So our conversation needs to move from, today I'd like you to start class on time, right? By 9:02, I want you to watch the clock. At 9:02, I want you to kick off with an activity at the beginning. In fact, you know what? Let's even talk through what that activity is going to look like and sound like. Because ultimately, what is your goal? I want you to immediately engage students with their lessons and not waste any time. So let's talk through what that activity is going to look like. So here's our activity. We're going to immediately put a prompt up on the board, and I would like you to immediately have participants in your classroom stand and talk about maybe a quote on the front board. Put 4 quotes up on the front board, have them read through the 4 quotes that connect to learning from the previous class, and have them move to a corner of the room that corresponds with the quote, and ask your students to engage in a discussion around that quote, why that's meaningful. Okay, boom. So we're spelling it out. I'm being very visual right now in my expectations. While your students are engaged in that discussion around a quote in different corners of the room, what I want you to notice is this. Notice how they jump into conversation right away. Notice the thinking that then comes out verbally, and take some notes on what you hear your students say. And I want you to notice how, by listening in on their conversations with their peers, you can learn a lot about their thinking and how much they've learned from the previous class. And I want you to notice how much this can teach you when you're listening in to teacher conversation. I want you also to notice the class engagement. I want you to notice how many students in your class are actively involved immediately. And I want you to notice how many more minutes a day you get of learning as opposed to waiting for everybody to be there. I also want you to notice when students come in 5 minutes late. Notice how quickly, when you have an activity like this going, notice how quickly they jump in to the new learning or to the learning you're asking them to do. So you're then going to not only be explicit, but you also want them to notice things. So take a minute and connect that piece now. As you're jotting down some notes in front of you and thinking about being explicit, now I want you to jot down a couple of things that you want the teacher to notice explicitly. What do you want them to see? Kind of like if you're sitting in the airplane with me, I give you steps A, B, C. I also need to make sure I ask you to notice X, Y, Z. All right. I'd like to hear from you right now. What thoughts, what ahas are you having as we talk about being explicit and as we talk about really pointing out what we want them to notice? Because if you go back to the slide in front of you, you see it says show what to do first, then ask for thinking. So we're asking them to think about something right after we ask them to do it. This is absolutely essential, because then when I come back in the next class period, or I come back to do another round of observations, I can then ask teacher, what have you been noticing? How is that driving your planning for your next class? Now I come in with a leading question. After I've given them some directive statements, try this, notice this. Now my next feedback prompt centers around how does this shape what you do for your next class period? Okay, we've really taken an unaware stage teacher who wants the make it take it. We've really unpacked what this learning looks like, how we as directors can provide the right observation and feedback practices to guide them through their learning using the make it take it action steps, right? I want to hear from you. What's a takeaway from you from hearing all of this right now? What are some questions you may have at this point? Thinking specifically about those scenarios. it can be easy for us to think that we need, while you're typing, by the way, so keep the comments coming. I'd love to hear from you. But it can be very easy for us to feel very bogged down by teachers who are in that unaware stage, who need take it action steps, because this requires a lot of energy and time from us. So what I will do is I offer you just this thought. Oftentimes, we don't need, and you've heard me share this before, we don't need a ton of feedback to shift our practice or to shift our thinking, to build awareness around something. Sometimes it just needs to be very targeted. It needs to be in the right language. And I find that if you were to give this to me, if I was that unaware teacher, I don't want ownership of what I'm doing, right? Things have been done to me. I'm okay with that. I like to come walk in my room and just do my thing. But if all of a sudden you're giving me some very explicit visuals of what you expect, what it should look like. You're asking me to notice things along the way. And then you're challenging me now to connect it with, well, how is this going to shift where I'm going next? And what more do I need as a learner? And you're talking to me in that language of, I'm the learner. What else do I need now from you? And then you're providing me opportunities to perhaps sit with other colleagues and engage in conversation or listen in on conversations about what's working in their classroom and how they do these things, how they engage students that come in who are late. Other people have this problem. So let's have a conversation today in our staff meeting as a collective group about other strategies that you use when when students come in late to class. How do you keep people active in the very first 15 minutes of class without waiting? What does this look like and sound like for you? And we begin to facilitate and create opportunities. You can see how a teacher that's in this stage, that's unaware, that just wants to make it take it because that's their primary learning style right now. You can see how we then begin to frame their learning, shift ownership, and they begin to learn. So Beth, you are thinking that as a director, you really have to have developed a relationship with your staff. Yes, absolutely. There needs to be that trust. But at the same time, Beth, I would ask you to say this. When you provide this level of feedback, well, actually, let me back up. If for some of you, I know you were part of a conversation that was had a while back, but for some of this feedback to take place, or for us to provide these learning opportunities, what you're really speaking to, Beth, is the fact that we need to, as directors, set the stage for this to happen. So we need to set the stage at the beginning, middle, end of the year, ongoing, right? Setting the stage with our staff going, listen, here's the deal. I'm here as a resource for your own professional learning. You can't be a teacher without being a learner. Teachers and learners go hand in hand. That's who we are as individuals. We're constantly being asked to learn new things. It's part of our role as teachers. We must be ongoing learners. And so for that to happen, here is your resource. And I'm going to be coming through your classrooms, going to be providing feedback. I'm going to be asking you to engage with your peers. This is part of the environment that I'm setting up within our program so that as we continue our learning, our students will only continue in that process as well. So it is important, Beth, to set the stage for this work. Okay, Debbie shared this. She needs to sign off. Thank you, Debbie, for sharing all your stuff. You said you need to ask the teacher what she notices when she gives students instructions. Listen more to your students. Okay, good. The teacher tells students to stop talking and listen to her. I don't think she realizes students talk because they don't always understand her instructions. So Debbie, what you're speaking to is the fact that teachers need to recognize these 4 learning styles. And these 4 learning styles can actually provide a frame for teacher instruction in their classroom. And that's essential. So I encourage you, you have this PowerPoint now on through Blackboard. You can take this off of here, and I encourage you to share these 4 learning styles with your staff. The next staff meeting, do a 10-minute quick touch base on these learning styles. A great activity, if you have a large group, is to throw them up there and ask teachers to go to a different corner of the room with their prominent learning style. Then engage in discussion about how our students are the same way. And it's important that we know ourselves so that we can then take our own ownership and begin to advocate for what we need. I am a make it take it person, so I need this, or I'm a Y person, I need this. We need to teach that to our students. And Beth, keep pushing the why. That's exactly right. As we begin to wind down, I know a few of you have to leave a little early. We have a few minutes left for some questions here in a minute. But what's important in this process is that we constantly do make sure that in any of our messaging, we constantly message this notion of you're a learner. Yes, you're teachers, but you're learners, and you need to know yourself as a learner. And I'm here to be your resource. So I want to make sure that I'm providing the right learning environment for you. And if you need something from me as you're learning something new, you need to speak up. You need to advocate for yourself, because at the end of the day, that's what we want our students to do. We want our students to understand how they learn and to be able to advocate for themselves. And many of them do. We just don't hear it as teachers sometimes, right? We have some of our adult learners that say, hey, I need to talk more. And we don't necessarily hear that as teachers. So when we as directors can help teachers understand it, it helps everybody. Danielle, you want to ask the teacher what she notices when she provides models for students to follow, and pauses to ask students to contribute to their own, following the model to check for student comprehension prior to having them move to complete the activity independently. Yes, and that is awesome, Danielle. The fact that you want to see what she notices. At the end of the day, we want to be able to get into teachers' brains, right? We want to understand how they think about what they do. So when we ask and provide and target our feedback toward those things, what do you notice when you're doing this? What were you thinking in that moment? Talk to me about that. Try this tomorrow. Notice this tomorrow. Notice XYZ and tell me how that changes your thinking. That's all types of messaging that we want to provide. Okay, as we begin to wind down now, here's what I would love to do. I would love to hear one final aha from you. Talk to me about, I've tried to bring this as tangibly home to the teacher that you have in the forefront of your mind. But what's one of your greatest takeaways from today, one big aha? I truly, truly believe that we need to capture those ahas and articulate them verbally. That's part of our own process learners. And it also gives an opportunity for others to hear and learn from you again. Suzanne, with your teacher, you want to ask her to notice what her students are doing when the expectation is for them to do a do now activity. Okay, yes, yes. I am a huge proponent for teachers who are unaware and need that make it, take it learning style. I'm a big proponent for asking teachers to jot down what they notice in the middle of lessons, in the middle of doing. We want to tell them what to notice, and we want them to write down what they see. It isn't sometimes for teachers enough to say, tell me what you noticed. For some of them, they won't notice much of anything, or they'll notice the wrong things. So for teachers who are unaware, this is again where we have to be even more explicit. Notice XYZ. What did you see? Notice what your students were doing in that moment. Tell me what you saw. Okay, I'd love to hear more from you. I know I've done a lot of talking, and this is the setup and the format today. My apologies again for earlier. Thankfully, I was able to get back online, and thankfully the animal control gentleman went away, and life is good. So let me hear more from you. What's your aha from today? What are you going to walk away with today? As you're thinking and as you're going to share here, I'm going to skip to the end right here. Bernice, understanding and sharing of the learning styles. Yes, reflect, reflect, reflect. Explicit action, make it, take it. Very good, yes. Notice if and which students contribute. Notice if they're able to complete the activity. Absolutely. Teacher learning styles will provide another way to reach all teachers. Yes, Beth. Giving choices. Two prominent words you've heard me repeat over and over, voice and choice. We have teachers that don't want to take ownership of their own learning. We have to provide opportunities for them to give voice and choice. That's a big thing. Setting the tone, yes, Danielle. Teachers are learners. We're here as resources. Yes, voice and choice. Important to think about how our teachers learn. Yes, their styles and what affects their teaching. It absolutely affects their teaching. And so many teach the way that they think that they learn, and it is that. And if we're to deepen and grow our teachers' knowledge and make them more effective in the classroom, this is an important piece. It's also important for our adult learners. You know, when you look at your clientele, the adult learners that sign up for the courses and attend, we need to give them a voice and help them recognize their own learning styles, because for many of them, they didn't have a great K-12 education. And so it's important that we help our adult learners that sit in our classrooms to have voice and choice and to recognize and identify, this is how I learn best. This is what I need. Yes, Suzanne, big point. Rather than point everything out to the teacher, ask her to notice what she's doing. Yes, yes, yes. Absolutely. Videotape is important, and I'll bring this up at the very end here since we have a minute left. Videotape can be used in a very careful way, but we absolutely can recommend a teacher, ask a teacher to videotape themselves, and then to tell us what they notice. We don't necessarily have to see the video. We can even encourage them just to video themselves, watch it, and talk about what they notice, but that's another great strategy that we can use. All right, as we bring today to a close, I want to thank you. Thank you for your flexibility and your patience, particularly at the beginning of today and the session. Again, I try to provide things that are very practical and applicable that you can take back and connect immediately. So I will say this again, Sue mentioned, I'm coming in June, and I'm going to be able to offer up a day of PD where we can really sit down and flesh further things out. So keep June in mind, and I would love to see all of you again, and know that I am always here. I throw this out all the time, but I'm here. Send me questions. Anything that you have, please reach out to me. I'm here as a resource to you. So with that being said, thank you, Kate, for setting all this up. Appreciate everybody. Thank you very much.